but perhaps more importantly, who we think is the right or has the right, I'm going to call it the right stuff to be, to run for office and to be leaders. And so we want to keep that in mind and sort of think about the concept of philosopher kings. Who should be philosopher kings? Plato's ideas of how we ought to, of the relationship of society with those who rule. And so, can philosophers become kings? Or should kings become philosophers? Should they be? But if you're at the top of if you're at the top of society, why would you want to become a philosopher? Like your job is not to. But yeah, so we're going to see other conceptions of who rules, and actually Aristotle has a very different take than Plato, for example. So we also talked about the period in which these philosophers are, and so sometimes when you think about philosophy, it's influenced by what is going on. So, for example, before maybe 1860s and 70s, nobody really talked about the 14th Amendment, particularly the third clause, the one that is about insurrection and whether someone who has led an insurrection, but also even the meaning of insurrection. So the Civil War was clearly an insurrection. Was January 6th an insurrection, or was it a protest, or was it just a bunch of friends hanging out in DC? No, it wasn't. So now the country is facing questions of, was that an insurrection? And if yes, what should the country do about it? And so even with the philosophies of people like Plato and Aristotle, and when they think about democracy, so they are working in a time when Athens had just been defeated by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. And then there were the Terrible 30. These are the Terrible 30 who were ruling like a council. And they were corrupt, they were selfish, and so these deliberations continue. If you actually come to forward by about 1800 years and think about Hobbes. When Hobbes is writing Leviathan, whose argument is that every society needs a very powerful state, he was writing immediately after the English Civil War. And so when you think about a civil war, there is a breakdown of order. And so what is the antithesis of breakdown of order? What's the antithesis of chaos? So he is writing. So people are influenced by the times in which they live. So people like Aristotle and Plato are writing in this time. Now, for example, Plato is criticized because apparently he taught Critias this nine of the Terrible 30. And so it's sort of like, but that's your friend. What are you telling us? These are your friends who are oppressing us. But so these discussions will continue. I think the role of a philosopher is to have what we might consider to be eternal truths. Can these ideas survive this moment? And so if you think of, for example, the Declaration of Independence, that is an example of, so if it had been written and applied the way it was written, then it is a thing that stands the test of time, that all men are created equal. And so if at that point we thought that all men included all women, or all Africans, then it would have made, but its application is sometimes what is. So when we think about what philosophers are talking about, the best philosophies and philosophers and the ideas will stand the test of time. And so, for example, when Plato is looking at democracy, he's looking at it from not just from that particular period, or at least that's the way we conceive it. And so again, we talked about these enduring questions. What is the meaning of justice? What is the nature of a just society? Now, we also come to the question of what is democracy? And so democracy often is defined as demos, people, kratia, power, so power of the people. But the question is, can people be tyrannical? Can people in the majority decide to oppress a minority? Now, the United States is a good example of that example. Actually, it wasn't even the majority. Because, land owning white men, that eliminated, all women, which is usually half the population. So how did they, now after 1920, you can say now the majority was actually oppressing the minority. But it is true that a majority can become tyrannical. And so can we say that is a democratic society? Is it a just society? So these are questions I think that are eternal. And so, for example, the conception of democracy has been changing. And according to some more recent thinking, a democracy is defined by the application of the rights of the majority to the minority. So the rights of the majority has, or how they treat the minority, is kind of what is seen as the standards. But so, again, we are talking about Plato, 3,500 years ago, maybe, no, 2,500 years ago. And so he is struggling with these two questions. He has some ideas about reality, but some of their ideas were grounded in not in the metaphysical, in the physical world. And so he talks about the changing particulars that are available to our senses. So, for example, if it's cold, if it's warm, if it's chilly, if it's raining. And then he also thought about unchanging eternal truths that are understood through intellect. Now, until maybe 2015, I think most Americans knew that there were unchanging truths. And then it was like, there's fake news, and you're like, wait, what is fake news? And then it's a question of, what is true? What is truth? So I don't know what truth is. Is it what we perceive to be? Or are there unchanging truths? Is the sky blue?
So some people might be blue, some people might be blue.
So we can't waffle. It's either blue or it's not. Is it? Are black people black?
I don't know. That's why I say it's complicated, because it's like from birth you're taught certain things. So it's like they become your truth because you were taught those things. But if you weren't taught that perspective, it wouldn't be true.
I see what you mean, but I don't know if I agree. Because, like, if the sky is blue, if you're told it's green, that doesn't make it true. You are misguided. Even though everyone told you that was the truth. Sort of like, the earth was the center of the universe, but it was not. Although
it's like the perception that some people say the earth is round. So you know what I'm saying? It's like.
But so are we saying there's a person's truths and there's eternal truths? Is that more? So, for example, now you hear people saying, I'm living my truth. Now, society will say, even though we have this habit of characterizing people based on certain classes and groups, but you hear someone, for example, say that now I'm living my truth.
So basically, they've been lying to themselves, or been lying to everybody around them about certain characteristics of themselves.
But is it a misapplication of the word truth? Like when we think about truth, or should we think broadly about truth? But then when we think broadly about truth, what is truth? So then if for example someone says fake news, then that can be true. Like it is true there's fake news because that is his perception. Like for example, if I say, a certain candidate is racist, and because he said some things about some people from a certain place, right? Wouldn't that be a truth? And then we dilute the truth. So what then is truth? So you didn't know you were going to come and question your whole belief system. But so there's, I think there's some things that are generally accepted now, whether they are truths and whether they are eternal. For example, there are people who believe with every fiber in their body that we are all created equal, or we evolved equal, that we are all equal. I do not dispute that. Now, how we apply equality is not the same. So can we say all human beings are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, even though those rights sometimes... So then are we saying that all human beings are not created equal? Or what are we saying? Or how are we applying that standard of all human beings? Now, we are not going to go into defining who a human being is, because then we have to start thinking about 6-week pregnancies, and is that a human being, or is a human being the one that is capable of living outside there? But then can we have a human being without that 6-week? See, this gets so when Plato talks about unchanging eternal truths, sort of like, I don't... what's he saying? What are truths? How can we understand these eternal truths? Do we share the same intellect? Because he says we can understand this through intellect. I don't know that we do. Now, of course, this is highly not helpful to our cause, because we're trying to figure out how did Western society grow, evolve, emerge, and what are the critical discussions and debates in the construction of Western society. But we have to... let me say this, and I am not going to say this lightly. When you believe that, for example, people are innocent until proven guilty, but then you have, for example, police shootings off. Even if someone, for example, steals, like if I steal stuff from a 7-Eleven, is that enough to get me shot?
It shouldn't be, but in today's society, it might.
It should not. And so what we are asking is, would a just society, is that enough? Or how can we then arrive at a just society that says, okay, if you stab someone while stealing at 7-Eleven, then you can probably get shot. But if you're just stealing, you know that's not enough to... now that would be maybe just. But then again, there will be people who will say that if you're stealing from 7-Eleven, it doesn't matter if you have, like, you're using a fingernail or a nail or a gun, you should get shot. And that's their conception of a just society. Now, here's the challenge though. We don't live in vacuums. We live in societies. And these societies have to come up with agreements on how we are going to live with each other. Now, here is maybe a more technical question. Maybe not technical. When does somebody's interest in you become sexual harassment? Like, what needs to happen, and how do you know if someone is just interested, or now it's like, now this is almost stalking?
I think it's like personal perception. Because that's just like, because if it's somebody that you're into or attracted to, and they do something, you might let it go a little further than somebody that you just don't like at all or don't find appeasing. If they do one thing, it's probably like, oh no, like.
So, but how does the person know?
I think it's just an internal feeling, like a feeling.
Like if you feel uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, but so let's say I make you feel uncomfortable, but how will I know?
You gotta voice that.
Mm.
You have to set up that boundary. If they continue to, overstep, then it becomes a problem. Like they can see you, be interested in you, and try to pursue you, and then
See, that's where I am. That's kind of where I am stuck. Like, when do you? Because most people will be decent and they'll not be like, right now we're getting married.
Yeah.
So how do you decide when this is annoying, and how does the other person know?
I feel like if somebody came up to you and was like, expressed their interest, and then you're like, oh, okay, like, well, maybe we can keep in touch. I'll see you around. But then it's like, if they make themselves known in every single space that you're in, then it's like, okay, were you popping up before, or have you always been here? I just never noticed you. And then if they, if you express like, okay, I'm kind of uncomfortable with the situation, we can just be friends, or like I just don't want anything to do with you. I think.
So you do have to express it.
Yes.
So
because if you don't, then it's just like they think the ball is in their court and they can try to work on it.
So that is very helpful. That's very helpful. However, there are societies in which nobody ever says yes. Then how do you know?
You mean their body language ever says yes? Like they never tell them to stop?
Yeah, like even if you're into them, you're not even going to say we can keep in touch, or so it's almost the answer is always no. Yeah, like that is what society says you should do. And so now, personally, I believe when people say what they say. Like if you say I'm hungry, I believe you. If you say no, I believe you. But if you're in a society that nobody ever says I'm hungry, but if you give them food, they are going to eat. You see that challenge? So again, how do you even understand some of these things? Like how do we communicate things? And actually, in that particular society, especially women don't. It would be odd, very odd, to express some interest in the other party. It's anyway. I digress. But thinking about eternal truths, thinking about how we communicate, thinking about how we construct society, thinking about expectations. Like this is what we are talking about. Now, of course, in the personal spaces, it's probably different. But when we're thinking about a just society, when we're thinking about crime, punishment, those kinds of things, we have to think about what are expectations. So, for example, I have heard, I don't know if this is true, that, for example, in American schools, teachers are more likely to be harsher with black kids than with white kids. Like they expect black kids to be more disruptive, and therefore they are more likely to discipline them more than.
I just went on my son's field trip yesterday and it was not the black kids.
But there are these, like, if you look at the data, black kids are more likely to be put in detention, in suspensions, in. So these are where we have come to.
But I think that's part of American society, like from back when it was slavery, like the treatment of black people. So although the economy and society evolved and changed and you were given certain rights and everything like that, it's still that certain mindset that's like embedded. It's just went on from generation to generation. It's just kind of changed a little bit, but not in the full aspect.
That's why they have like the school to prison pipeline or whatever as well too, I feel.
So we can't really call this a just society,
Right.
or is this justice?
No.
Now you say it's not justice. What does the other part of society
It's
say?
just you did. That's just how it is. It's just how it is.
Yeah, like if you're making trouble, you get in school detention and suspension and other things, and eventually you, like, it's so when we are thinking about these issues, including how society is constructed, and I will say this in this. So I grew up in Kenya, and I grew up at a time when YouTube didn't exist. Now, when you saw Western movies, there was a very specific way in which people are portrayed. Now there's YouTube, so people probably have different perceptions. But then, if you are asked, what is your perception of black people in America? They are basketball players. They are rappers. They are, I don't even think they were rappers, like just like musicians, or they are drug dealers, or some other criminal. That is what was. Now, of course, you have the other side, which is like the heroes, and they are going to save all the kids who are. Now, I don't know if we necessarily believe our own creations, but so when those movies, and so this is partly, I don't know if you stay in up to date with entertainment, but Black Panther and Wakanda Forever were some of the highest grossing movies ever, and so was I think it's I forget the name, but it's one of the Marvel movies with a Chinese character, something of 10 Rings. Yeah, The Legend of 10 Rings. And this is because people see themselves represented. Like this is how even your society has heroes. It's not just this particular one that has heroes. But the way we construct society, even so, for example, the presidencies in this country, clearly all white men except one who was half white, maybe. So the way we construct society, and I think every society aspires to justice, to be a just society. Now, how do we do that? I don't think Tuesday was very helpful because we are going back to the same old. I have no political opinion. So Plato. This is a little about Plato, and we shall not talk about. But he was very disillusioned with what he called the mob. So his conception of democracy was, you can't let the mob rule. Like the and I don't know if you've ever heard of this, that that when you have a mob, they're using the brain capacity of the dumbest among them. Like, it's not the intellectuals who will prevail. Sort of like, let's go burn that building. Yeah, let's go burn it. And nobody's like, but why are we burning the building? And, what about the owner and all the investment? And nobody's thinking about that. So to entrust ruling to what we call the mob, the populace. Now, I feel like I agree with him a little. I don't know if, and I'm really maybe basing this on my experience in Kenya, but sometimes you talk to people about politics and you're like, I don't think you should be allowed to vote. Because, people don't know stuff. And you're telling them to choose government. Like if you think about, I was watching some interviews from Tuesday, and you just hear people's reasoning and you're like, no. But this is who gets to vote. Now, the other side was the elite. So, and if you think about the elites, there's actually a theory called power elite, or elite theory. And this suggests that the people who rule society are specific groups of people, that they are not elected, but they rule. So think about, for example, Walmart, the Waltons. Think about people like Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. Nobody has elected them, but if they wanted to go to the White House, I'm sure they would just walk in. And so these are the elites, the Koch brothers, the wealthy people. So he doesn't think that they also have the interests of the public at heart, which is probably true. But then the question remains, who should rule? And so again, he goes back to the whole, justice. How do we construct a state, a society in which we all are stakeholders? I'm not sure that he really comes up with, he does talk about, the philosopher kings, but I don't know that most philosophers want to be kings, and most kings are not philosophers. So he also talks about some other things about the state and justice, and he kind of begins to confuse himself. But he talks about justice being the order of the state. But as we are saying, is justice really the order of the state? If you're walking, if you can shoot people because they turned in the wrong driveway,
Or knocked on your door.
so is that really because the state has said stand your ground, now you can do that? And the person was not even I don't know, this country too gun happy. But so justice, I don't know if it's necessarily the order of the state. States can be, now again, this is not the US, but if the order of the state is like Saudi Arabia that says women cannot go outside by themselves, is that justice? Is that, if it's like naturally it's France, which enacted laws that suggest that that banned the burqa, the Muslim scarf, that, yeah. So that is government policy. Is that justice? Now, there could be all kinds of problems with that. And so state being the visible embodiment of justice, I'm not sure that we... Now, I also want you to remember that part of what we are doing here is thinking about the ideas that underwrite the Western state. So, for example, when someone says state is the visible embodiment of justice, there's the state, but can the state be unjust? And the state can be unjust. But the Greeks were also they were not super metaphysical. They kind of really talked about the human body as, and if you look at their carvings or things that are based on the Greeks, they are very flattering of human beauty. And so, for example, human beauty that was also associated with a fair mind. So intelligence. But now there's these other things. So in a law, individual, so when the state is just, everyone will know and they will live justly. But again, remember, we are talking about Athens, which had 250,000 people. Only 40,000 were citizens. Women could not vote. So who are the people? Who are the souls that we're talking about here? Is it just the souls of men, or so again, is that justice? Is that, yeah. Now, this is a summary of what, especially some of the. So again, we have to question even Plato with all his wisdom and his conception of what the state and justice and the relationships are. Can we find fault with them? And so this is kind of what I'm saying with the write-ups on the modern theory. Like, if you take the concept of justice and look at how it's applied today, or how it's even defined, who decides what is just? Does the person who is at whom the injustice is aimed have a recourse? And so if you sort of think about practical cases like the Innocence Project, like how many people have been exonerated, but also even think about the idea of jury trial. Anyone ever been on a jury trial?
You're trying to get me
So this is what I decided I would do if I was ever called for jury trial. I would tell them I am incapable of being objective, because justice is constructed. And I would give the judge a whole spiel on on justice and those kinds of things.
Like, no, he can't.
Exactly. Because I mean, I'm trying to get out of it, but I also don't know if I should sit in judgment of men, because I'm not, but also I don't know that I know all the information. You're being presented the information. How do I know this is all the information that there is about this issue? So I find that a little, but also can we be sure? Now, particularly when we say a jury of your peers. So think of, I'm going to pick on Mississippi. Like if a black man is on trial and you have 12 white jurors, that's a jury of your peers. Like, how do we define peers? Because I would challenge that. I'd be like, these are not my peers. Never seen them in. You can say a jury of fellow Americans, but not my peers. My peers are on the street corner. Like, that's who you should be. Maybe. So when we sort of think about even like those ideas of what justice is, you can take that apart. When we think about even concepts like truth, what is truth? Is truth variable? How can we arrive at the truth? Are a person's truths a thing, or are we making stuff up as we go? No. But so these are other things that are, or major issues and questions that are attributed to Plato. Now, these are linked to his, he, especially the Republic is a good book to sort of read. And so, he makes some of these arguments like why true philosophers would make the best rulers. And one of the things that he says is that they would be compelled to rule, because it's almost like if you see a house burning, you're compelled to save the cats and people, I think. So that's what he says. Philosophers it would be their responsibility. They would feel compelled to rule so that they ensure that the society is ruled well. He talks about the love of wisdom, knowledge of reality, distinctions between knowledge, ignorance, and opinion, which I think are important. Now, the lover of knowledge, which is the true philosopher, but how do we know that knowledge is knowledge and not opinion. Now, in theory, we would test things. The difference between opinion and knowledge is that knowledge is probably empirically tested, but can we test everything? So he does talk about those kinds of things. The best rulers being true philosophers. Yeah, knowledge of the good. It's worth sort of looking at. Now I'm going to skip this because it's a bit of his life, his trips to Sicily and southern East Italy, and engaging with other Pythagorean. You probably have met Pythagoras. Math through Pythagoras' whole thing was how the truth is expressed in numbers, like 3, 4, 5. That is a truth. So he did engage with them, and so there were some things that he took from them. For example, the idea of the immortality of the soul. Is the soul immortal? Do we have souls, or are we like?
I don't know if they're immortal.
But do we have souls? What's this? Or are we told by a religion that we have souls?
Yeah. And then, but I don't feel like it's just one religion. Like every religion, in a way,
They all.
depict a soul.
Yeah.
Like whether it be reincarnation to something.
Yeah, but do we have souls because we want to be different from animals? Or do we have souls because we know
Dogs go to heaven. They got the souls too.
animals have souls?
Yes. I mean, I feel like everything that's living, that's like in a form that can, like, eat, breathe, things like that. I feel like they have souls.
Including plants?
Who knows? Who knows?
See? Now we get to the... So is it the truth that we have souls, that animals have souls, that plants have souls? Because, apparently they are alive. Because if you follow the logic of that argument, then in theory, plants have souls.
I mean, they can die, so.
So they have souls.
I'd
They
say
have
that.
plant souls.
Yeah, I mean,
So sometimes when you think about these things, you're like, I'm just tired. I don't want to think about. But maybe when we don't, there is a point where I think most humans get, and you're like, what does it even matter? Yeah, like if plants have souls, so what? What if animals have souls? But we've been eating animal souls for a while, so maybe that's.
We've been eating the flesh. The soul has gone on right there in the little egg that's getting ready to hatch in a little while.
Well, so those kinds of questions, and so he also engaged with. Now this is different because Pythagoreans kind of believed in the last judgment, while most Greeks just believed in like they didn't even have they had heavens, but that's where the gods lived. There wasn't like an afterlife where you judged and I'm like that was less pressure to do the right thing, because now you're like, what if I do the wrong thing? Am I going to hell? So he made of last judgment, and of course the idea that math was key to understanding true relationships. In fact, if you probably have heard of Euclid, and there's Euclid's common notions. They are actually true, and I'll try to find them sometime. But so this is some of what Plato was doing. Now, he has some good advice and some good goals. So one of his goals was to get his students, so if you think of the Platonic Academy, to get students to be independent thinkers. So think for yourself. And I value that. I want you to think about stuff. Now, there are people who think about stuff and you're like, how did you arrive at that? Not in a, like the earth is flat, really. But it's important to be good thinkers and independent thinkers and to even question the things that we talk about here. Because, what are truths? And so he then comes to the conclusion that the only good life life worth living is one reasoned by your own mind, not others' ideas and opinions. Now, I will put an asterisk on that. What if someone decides that the best life is one full of drugs and murder and other things? And he has sat down and reasoned and said that is what, for some reason, I watch a lot of murder shows. Not sure why. But you see like kids who say all they want to be is like a renowned serial killer. You're like, of all the things you could do in the world, that's what you came up with, you know. So I don't know necessarily that this is without a qualifier, but I also don't think he was thinking about serial killers. But I think the idea is that you think for yourself. And now I think sometimes you don't have to go through everything yourself. You can learn from others. But so examining your life history ideas, you're ready for knowledge. And so he famously said, so if you're familiar with tabula rasa, that the mind is, like it's a blank slate. And so we begin by not knowing, or at least assuming we do not know, and therefore being open to learning, to knowing. And he actually famously said, I know not, therefore I am. So not knowing is the first step that, yeah. Now his ideas are expressed especially through dialogue. So he creates these other characters with whom he has dialogue, but it's really not. It's almost like you're, responding to some other person, but the idea is to present contrasting views. And so, the most famous dialogue is the Republic, his best known work. So he talks about democracy, which I think is our concern because of modern day Western states. Freedom is a major value, but it's possible that too much freedom leads to tyranny. I think he missed the point of maybe the freedom, too much democracy by the majority can lead to tyranny. And this is what I think slavery was. So the idea of anarchy, because again, if you really think about slavery, that was anarchy. It wasn't like the purge, but it was like, how can you in good faith hold people in slavery and talk about ideals of democracy? How can you hold people as second-class citizens and then tell the world this is the emblem of democracy during the civil rights era? And so he also critiques democracy, and I think he was very right, because we are seeing this part now, that democracy or invites politics power-seeking individuals who are motivated by personal gain. I don't think this is... Now, I think some people want to serve and to actually make a difference, but I have also seen people who, it's so not sure if you know who the senator from New Jersey is. Is like two. You know the senators from New Jersey? Cory Booker. Now, Cory Booker is well known. The other one is, what's his name? Menendez. He's the one who was found with like $500,000 of gold bars in like his fridge. Yeah. And it's sort of like,
You said Booker?
so Cory Booker is one, but the other one is Menendez.
Okay.
So Menendez is the one who had gold bars. In fact, he's right now under investigation.
Where did he even get that from?
So
You can look at him.
his
Like,
his wife, I think, might be half Egyptian or something, or maybe
he look
Mexican.
like he a little corrupt.
But he's a lot corrupt.
Yeah, he
And
looked like it.
and this is his second investigation. So like he was doing the bidding for Qataris and Egyptians, and so they were paying him in gold. And you're like, well, I guess. Yeah. So there's this whole scandal of why do you have, I think the gold bars were in like his fridge or something. I feel like that's not good for his food, maybe. But so you can begin to say, but also if you think about Illinois, it's likely that most Illinois governors have gone to jail. Not sure why they produce such corrupt people. But for example, when Obama became president, the governor tried to sell his seat, his because his Senate seat, and he was negotiating it. So Plato was right. Sometimes democracy does invite people who are motivated by personal gain rather than a public good. And so that's probably not, yeah. So he talks about, we have talked about that, but one of the critiques of his idea of philosophers as rulers is that they would have no private family life, that they would have very little remuneration, and that they would have a very ordinary life. So they would dine in common halls. They would have wives and children who are living in those. Yeah, so he doesn't see, like the way you have Secret Service following even the former president's kids. However, in Iceland, population about 500,000, the president rides a bicycle to work. Now, I think riding a bicycle is, public roads, no security. The president of Bolivia actually had to be compelled to move to like because he lived in the house he grew up in.
Oh, he don't want to leave.
Yeah, he was like, I'm president, but I don't need all that fanciness. So it is possible that you can have a modest a modest family life. But I mean, just look at Biden and his retinue. But actually, Biden is not. Look at Trump and all his brood and all. So play that, and we are paying for that, including when they go shoot like tigers and lions and things. Like, why are we so yeah, so the idea is that philosopher kings would rule because they have, well, first he says they have no ambition to rule, but they are compelled to rule because it's the right thing to do. Like, society will be better off if they actually do those things. And so they will see ruling as a necessary evil. It needs to be done. The best person should do it, not because that they will use their time thinking. And those kinds of things. They have no ambition to rule, but they are best prepared to rule. I see some, now if this was true, it would be great, but I don't think in the Western society anyone comes to power without having some sort of ambition. So I don't know if he was very right about that. Yeah, so they would enjoy respect, and so he had other classes in society like the guardians, who are like the soldiers, the philosopher kings, and so on. So but he also talks about, so, and part of his reasoning is these four things. He talks about people being fundamentally irrational. They are driven by appetites. They are captive to egoistic passions and informed by false beliefs. He's saying this 2,500 years ago. So he was almost a prophet. But then he qualifies this and says, even though we are those things, we cannot live alone. We are social, and therefore we live with other people, even when we have no need to. Now, let me find that. I don't know if I can find that. But he does talk about man being a political animal and how we live with other people, we have need for other people even when we don't have need for other people because we are political animals. So that is Plato. We are going to stop there. On Tuesday we'll talk about Aristotle, who was a disciple or student of Plato. Now, is anyone free this evening?